What's up, guys? John the Morgile here, checking in for a new flat earth video for you. I hope you do enjoy it. Let's play Debunk the Globe. It's a fun game. I mean, really, what is it that's so hypnotic about giant blue balls that people can't imagine a scenario without the dreidel globe perpetually spinning at just hypersonic velocities in the tropical areas and beyond, allegedly, orbiting around the sun at speeds which are quite incomprehensible, not comparable to anything we can possibly imagine in our day-to-day lives. That's right, spinning around faster than sound, hauling ass through space on the ludicrous speed spaceship Earth. Way more violent than any salt and pepper shaker ride at the fair indeed. And what exactly is it which allows this spaceship Earth to defy so many known immutable laws of nature and physics? Like, what goes up must come down, for example, is antithetical to a scenario where we're all on the gyroscopic edge of this spaceship Earth, and yet we somehow get a perfect, predictable reality where what goes up must come down indeed, at least for solid high-density objects, in spite of the fact that all practical laws of physics would demand that anything resting upon the supersonic edge of the spinning ball Earth bullet should be flung off the face of the Earth into space at speeds up to 1,000 miles an hour at the equator, at a right angle to the hypothetical axis of rotation deep in the bowels of the Earth sphere. Evoking the gravitron analogy, if you were to climb over the top of the gravitron ride and somehow begin walking around on the outside edge of the gravitron, you'd need to hang on by your fucking toenails or else be flung off into the cotton candy machine and they'd be scooping pink sponge sugar out of your ears for weeks. Indeed, that's exactly what you would expect to happen upon the hypothetical spinning ball Earth. The flying off into space part, not the cotton candy, of course. Yet the theory of gravity was crafted in order to explain just how in the hell what goes up must come down could even be physically doable upon such a barrel-rolling carnival ride, which is supposedly constantly occurring in the standard model of all things. The next time the fair comes to town, remember to go on the gravitron and try to just toss a ball around to your friends on the gravitron. And good luck with that. Due to the manner which physical reality operates, tossing a ball between friends as you're spinning around in the gravitron ride is extremely difficult, as such tossed balls simply don't retain the rotational velocity or rotational frame of reference as people stuck to the ride after such a ball is released from that reference frame and tossed around a bit. And this is exactly the sort of thing that we should expect to see if the world was actually spinning around 1,000 miles an hour at the equator. Certainly the games of football and tennis would be something similar to trying to toss a ball around on the gravitron ride. This is all nonsense, and the simple truth is the world is demonstrably and obviously at rest, not spinning around at all, not orbiting at all. It's at rest and demonstrably so. The reason that things don't go flying off at some crazy angle at 1,000 miles an hour into space has nothing to do with gravity, but it has everything to do with the fact that the world is indeed at rest, and we're actually not standing on the sides of some spinning ball. The world is a static plane, just as all our God-given logic and practical senses tell us. Practical experiences and our innate senses do not lie, but we've been conditioned to simply ignore our natural ability to orient ourselves within the world, quite expertly in fact. If the motion they claim with the heliocentric model was actually occurring, you'd certainly never see a still pond, and our God-given senses would tell us that we're in all of this hypersonic, ludicrous, orbital curvilinear motion paths. But you certainly would never expect to see still waters upon a pond, that's for sure. Gravity is merely a theory to explain just how in the hell what goes up must come down is even theoretically possible upon a hypothetical spinning ball Earth. Thus, TV personalities like Neil deGrasse Tyson can pretend that objects falling to the Earth when released somehow proves the illogical, nonsensical, whimsical theory of gravity.
What is gravity?
You have no idea. Okay, next question.
What is gravity?
You have no idea. Okay, next question.
What is gravity?
You have no idea. You have no idea. Okay, next question.
This is called gravity. That's what I do. I'm Neil deGrasse Tyson, bitch. That's what I do. I'm Neil deGrasse Tyson, bitch. That's what I do. I'm Neil deGrasse Tyson, bitch.
What is gravity?
You have no idea. Okay, next question.
This is called gravity.
We can describe gravity. We can say what it does to other things.
This is called gravity.
This is exactly the sort of circular logic or self-referencing logical fallacy which runs rampant in the globe Earth belief system, and yet the very same clever people promoting such fallacies masquerade as masters of science, more like preachers of scientism. You simply can't dream up the theory of gravity to explain how everything isn't flying off the face of the world at 1,000 miles an hour, and then point to your mic drop as proof of that theory. This sort of circular logic is what's gotten us into so much trouble in Globe-Tardia land. And this blind faith sect of globe worship, which provides the underlying framework for the religion of scientism, where masses of people, atheists and Christians alike, build their very paradigm or worldview around these logically repulsive belief systems dreamed up by globetards. It really takes a special breed of person to espouse a totally radical, unbelievable, and totally illogical position, such as the belief in a spinning ball Earth, and then take a natural occurrence like what goes up must come down, an occurrence which would simply never happen if we were spinning around 1,000 miles an hour, and then point to what goes up must come down as somehow proof of this nonsensical theory which simply couldn't support something like what goes up must come down without the utter void of logic and misinformed mental gymnastics we find with the likes of the theory of gravity or dark matter or dark energy. And let's not forget the obviously level curve of the sea, sea curve level. The horizontal horizon comprised of the spherical surface somehow deviously presenting its spherical self as an extended plane. How very tricky of the ball Earth to always appear as a planar surface, right? The ball Earthers, the globetards, tell us that we can see ships going over the curve of the Earth, but when we look for physical evidence of this curvature, which should be pretty obvious, all we ever find is an extended level surface in all directions without any curvature at all. When we show them that the ship only appears to descend along a distant curve due to the natural operation of perspective, coupled with atmospheric refraction, and this optical illusion has nothing to do with curvature whatsoever, when you tell them that and prove this to them, they will just simply refuse to understand the implications here or plug their ears, close their eyes, and go la 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 la. That's not how you science. But they just ignore you, and then they change the subject to some other, totally unrelated and illogical reason they believe the Earth is a spinning ball, just like we all did when we were tricked into doing so as little kids. This is a telltale signature of long-term programming, which has been laser focused on surgically removing our collective ability to rationally orient ourselves within physical reality and rationally build our worldviews or paradigms, since we've all been deceived about the very ground that we walk upon. When making any video about debunking the globe, you really gotta talk about satellites. In having this discussion, you rightly cannot continue without dealing with the pesky issue of our respective national space agencies and specifically alleged satellites in space. This is a big one. This is a big part of the belief system of Ball Earth and NASA and infinite space. In our modern age, most people are convinced in the spinning ball Earth fairy tale for a variety of reasons, very much depending on the person's experience, intelligence, and really their passion for the fields of science and exploration, among other character traits, which will determine exactly how much a person cares about the spinning ball Earth and which combinations of Ball Earth / infinite space programming are the strongest for that particular individual. But there is certainly one common denominator which seems to have an extremely powerful effect on all globetards, not only just individually, but this one is sort of a conventional wisdom which is beyond argument according to all of them. The fact that your cell phone functions. Of course, most globetards will tell you,
NASA isn't lying because their satellites in space are required for our cell phones to work. Don't you know anything?
Says the globetard.
In order for this cell phone to work, it's actually communicating with geostationary satellites thousands of miles away. If NASA were lying, my cell phone wouldn't work. Therefore, NASA isn't lying. Satellites are real, and the Earth is a spinning ball.
The problem is, if you, aka the flat Earth proponent, who happens to be 100% correct, if you start arguing against the points made by the globetard straight off, you'll actually be inadvertently making certain positive claims which simply are not true, making yourself seem ignorant because you seem to think that satellites are communicating with people's cell phones. Stupid flat earther. Let me explain. So, cell phones actually are not claimed by capital S science to communicate directly with satellites. Nope, not even one little bit. For things like GPS to work, the cell phone is in direct communication with 3 nearby radio towers on the ground, which instantly locate the device on 3 axes or 3 vectors, pinpointing the location using simple trigonometry functions. We won't even get into whether or not triangulation and other trig functions pre-require triangles, but the truth is directly in the name, if you're wondering. Anyways, because the cell phone companies don't actually claim that the cell phone is in communication with satellites, in rebutting the globetard down this vein and begin proving satellites do not exist, you are debunking a claim that they made about cell phones not communicating with satellites. Thus, you are thereby making the positive claim that such a thing was ever claimed by the cell phone company to begin with. Does that make sense? They do, in fact, claim that the little metal satellite dish on top of your house or over there by the fence is, in fact, communicating with so-called geostationary satellites some 20,000 plus miles away. Now, we can indeed go about debunking that, but I think that anyone who holds the position subliminally or otherwise, the globetards that believe in spinning ball Earth because their cell phone is talking to satellites in space, you really must do some introspection and soul searching down this road towards the truth. But if you're able to be honest with yourself, and if you're one of those people that holds the position that cell phone and things like GPS technology somehow prove that the satellites are up in space, I would say that your faith is founded upon rather shaky foundations indeed. At any rate, satellites do not exist, could never exist, and will never exist. There never was a reason for them to even be attempted in the first place. In a nutshell, satellites are irrelevant, impossible, and simply never had any reason to exist, except for a mass mind control of the entire world that started off right after World War II. That's the truth about satellites. In order to understand why satellites are such a ridiculous impossibility, we'll simply, first off, ignore the fact that an orbiting satellite pre-requires a spinning ball Earth concept to be true. So, if you still believe the Earth is a spinning globe, the simple fact that orbiting satellites are fundamentally impossible will be completely lost on you. I realize that sounds like an insult to the globe Earth believers' intelligence, but it's not. I understand that getting past the ball Earth programming is an extremely difficult thing to get past, but at the end of the day, since the surface of vast bodies of water all over the world have never shown overall convexity in any sense, and the fact that the surface of water is always level, even when measured and observed over hundreds of square miles, water is always level everywhere, and there is no evidence for curvature anywhere. And in fact, all measurements of the Earth's surface and the surface of its waters are shown to be level with zero exceptions. With that being said, if the Earth doesn't have curvature, then it could not be a sphere by definition. No sphere, no infinite space in all directions, as claimed by all the space agencies. Without sphere Earth and without infinite space, the two being interdependent and mutually exclusive to a flat Earth, then you simply cannot physically orbit the ball Earth if the ball Earth does not exist. The concept of satellites was first dreamed up by science fiction author Arthur C. Clarke in an article called Extraterrestrial Relays: Can Rocket Stations Give Worldwide Radio Coverage? This is a rather absurd assumption of a spherical Earth. It's like a phantom of the ball theory. What they were saying was that worldwide radio communications wasn't possible due to the curvature of the Earth getting in the way, creating a physical barrier to radio frequency waves, thus necessitating satellites to act as like signal repeaters up there, and thus bouncing these RF signals off of the satellites in space in order to achieve very long distance radio shots around the ball, which are theoretically impossible on the globe without something like a satellite, according to them, right? Let's ignore the fact that ham radio operators were often communicating across continents and across hemispheres, like from the United States to Australia, without satellites, proving conclusively that this alleged quote-unquote convexity of the Earth, that was preventing such long-distance RF shots was just imagined. It wasn't real. But that's besides the point. So in 1915, the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, or NACA, the precursor to NASA, they certainly didn't achieve anything in the way of space exploration from 1915 on. While they certainly did make advancements in aeronautics, it wasn't until the end of World War II when, after the injection of Nazi propagandists into American government and aeronautics endeavors via clandestine operations like Paperclip, it's then that we started to see absolutely Herculean windfalls of advancement during the so-called space race after World War II was over, right? So the term space age was first coined in 1945, and within a few short decades, American Freemasons were pretending to walk around on the moon, the culmination of a decades-long culture-wide predictive programming / trauma-based mind control campaign of the ages. If we take some time to investigate the first trauma-based portion of the space deception, you cannot tell the story of American aeronautics without also telling the story of Soviet or Russian aeronautics. The two go hand in hand, are interdependent upon one another for national pride and national participation, a necessary step in the overall great deception of space. For two nations who don't exactly feel all warm and fuzzy about their respective governments in general, they do indeed love their national space programs, like a snuggly puddle of kittens indeed. It is quite obvious in retrospect that the entire space race and so-called war were a deceptive tactic towards this end of national pride and isolationism from our overseas counterparts. This type of culture-wide mob mentality, trauma-based mind control was spelled out perfectly in George Orwell's book, 1984, penned in the 1940s, if I'm not mistaken, during this very time of rolling out the space age propaganda. As long as everyone in the country is legitimately afraid of this evil, irredeemable foreign enemy over the sea, and boy, were people legitimately afraid. The amount of propaganda pumped out during these decades when the space race was being kicked off involving, well, like nuclear annihilation was second to none. Fear porn was at a maximum in the 1940s and 50s. They used every trick in the book to convince everyone that we could be in a nuclear war with Russia at any moment. I think it's definitely worth mentioning that during this same time frame, the CIA was rolling out LSD into the population, which was an extension of the MK Ultra mind control programs, where they were using trauma and drugs in order to do all kinds of crazy things with unwitting victims, right? So you've got the whole Manchurian Candidate thing, or like the Jason Bourne thing, where you've got sleeper cell super soldiers that have multiple personalities embedded into the one body, unbeknownst to the main personality of that person. You've got characters like Timothy Leary peddling LSD during the same time frame, where the US government was trying to convince everyone in things like the space race and nuclear bombs. And so, in my opinion, it's really no surprise and really no coincidence that LSD was being pumped out by the CIA during the same time. So I don't think we can just blow right past that. They used every trick in the book to convince everyone that we could be in a nuclear war with Russia at any moment. The thing is, Russia and the United States have actually been allies this entire time. They were never actually enemies, and by the way, nuclear weapons do not exist. Nuclear weapons could not possibly exist, but that's also a topic for another video. The point is, whether or not nukes existed, the important thing is that everyone believed that they existed, and furthermore, everyone believed, thanks to a never-ending onslaught of fear porn and propaganda, that we could all die in a nuclear blast at any moment. With all that being said, it created a situation where, for the people who lived through that era, it's practically unthinkable that the US and Russia could be secretly in collusion regarding all sorts of things, but specifically the space race. I hear people say this sort of thing all the time, like, well, if NASA was faking space, the Russians would have caught them. That might seem to be logical to the boomer thinking it, but what a repulsive example of so-called logic used by so many deceived people. The truth is, this dichotomy or Hegelian dialectic couldn't have been more perfectly executed than in this example of the Sputnik satellite scare, wherein the Russian space agency launched a basketball-sized satellite, some 350 miles in altitude, orbiting over the American continent, allegedly to spy on the American people. Now, let's not forget, the American media hyped the shit out of the Sputnik satellite. From dinner tables to water coolers, you can bet your ass that Sputnik was being discussed all across America during that time. And of course, this is a huge problem. The Russian enemies are spying on us from space.
Look, you can even see it in the sky if you have a telescope. We need to do something about these spying Russians in space. We need to dump a ton of money into our space program and beat these Russians to the moon before they microwave our brains with gigawatt signals from space.
But did anyone think to ask, is any of this even possible? It's funny because growing up, I had often heard this story about the Sputnik scare, and I could have sworn that people were saying that they could even see the satellite from the ground. However, it appears that now in the future, the official word on the internet top search results is that no, the people could not see the satellite from the ground with the naked eye. So either I've got my wires crossed and maybe nobody actually claimed they could see Sputnik from the ground, or perhaps the Ministry of Truth is hard at work changing the ancient newspaper articles to align with their narrative. And this is, of course, because anyone who did claim that they could see a basketball-sized object from over 350 miles away is absolutely hallucinating, as no such tiny object, no such small angular size, no matter how brightly it might have been lit, could possibly be visible from that sort of distance. And by the way, to this day, people indeed claim that they can see satellites from the ground from hundreds or even thousands of miles away, which is physically impossible for the human eye to resolve such tiny angular sizes. Even in the case of the Lie SS, supposedly some 350 plus miles up, allegedly the size of a football field, yet people claim they can see it with the naked eye or even with the aid of a telescope, but such an object, even if it was allegedly very brightly lit, although they are not claimed to be brightly lit, you'd never be able to resolve that sort of angular size from that distance. It is beyond the capacity of the human eye to render, and indeed beyond the capacity for telescopes to render. Let's go ahead and quote Wiki just a bit, involving the Soviet space program and their comeuppance.
The Komyshayeska program, SSSR, was the national space program of the former Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, USSR, active from 1955 until the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991. Soviet investigations in rocketry began with the formation of a small research laboratory in 1921, but these efforts were hampered by the devastating war with Germany. Competing in the space race with the United States and later with the European Union and China, the Soviet program was notable in setting many records in space exploration, including the first intercontinental missile, the R-7 Semyorka, that launched the first satellite, Sputnik 1, and sent the first animal, Laika, into Earth orbit, allegedly in 1957, and placed the first human in space in 1961, Yuri Gagarin.
And get a load of that video. It looks like claymation to me, for sure, like stop motion animation. I guess you could say better than like Jason and the Argonauts, but certainly faked. Anyway, back to the quote from Wiki.
In addition, the Soviet program also saw the first woman in space, Valentina Tereshkova, in 1963, and the first spacewalk in 1965.
So when researching this Russian space program, isn't it rather convenient that you can't really find anything, at least I couldn't find anything prior to this launch of the two rockets right around the year 1957? Maybe I didn't dig very deep, but you would think that if Russia had been launching all sorts of test launches leading up to the very first satellite ever, the Sputnik, which was the one that scared America shitless, allegedly, there would be a ton of information out there of these evolutionary steps towards Russian space satellites, right? But no, it certainly appears upon my cursory research into the subject, and maybe it's because that information is classified, or I don't know, like maybe I didn't dig very deep and I didn't dig that deep, but upon my cursory research into the subject, it appears that Russians basically one and done it when it came to them allegedly launching their first satellite, which was claimed to have been spying on America. Just one and done it, right? That is all very convenient because, as my grandfather told me personally, in like the 1990s that the US military was in fact sending up high altitude spy balloons since the 1940s, which, when vast arrays are used, things like the radio triangulation or GPS or signal repeating for long distance communications, were certainly possible going back as far as the 1940s and the early 1950s for sure, using high altitude weather balloons or arrays of balloons, not satellites. And of course, they even had spy planes, very high altitude spy planes that would go above enemy radar, but could also behave as eyes in the sky, signal repeating, and that sort of thing as well. The very concept that we somehow need satellites in space in order to outscience the Russians was a total PR stunt, trauma-based mind control campaign which pulled the wool over basically the entire world's eyes, convinced them that we need to spend billions of untold dollars every year on space science and exploration. And what has that gotten us? People love to point to all the patents and inventions that NASA is achieving. However, most of that stuff, 99.99% of that stuff, if you actually look into the patents that NASA is coming up with, they're all being filed by inventors on NASA's payroll who are not astronauts in space. So inventors on the ground who are on NASA's payroll. Only goes to profit corporations and is not going back to the original investors, i.e. you and me, the taxpayers. The reason that you will not find any, except maybe perhaps a few token patents filed by some astronaut or the other, but the reason you won't find astronaut inventors, but only inventors who've never been to space on NASA's payroll, is because the type of person who invents complex things is not the type of person who's going to lie to the world about going to space. Lying Freemasons are never going to invent anything. The actual inventors on NASA's payroll don't necessarily need to be lying about anything or in on this hoax in order to be in their position. So like the child that gets the quarter under their pillow after losing a tooth isn't in on the tooth fairy hoax, right? I mean, they're certainly participating in the hoax. They got the quarter under their pillow, but they're not in on the hoax. Perfect analogy for the inventors and other people on NASA's payroll who don't have a clue. They were all tricked into believing the Earth's a spinning ball since they were toddlers, just like everyone else was. Probably 99.9% of NASA employees don't understand the deception even exists. Only the people who claim to have been to space and done spacewalks are lying for sure. In closing this section on how satellites are not necessary, they are irrelevant and impossible, let's just review that timeline again. 1915, NACA, NASA's precursor, was developing rocket technologies and ballistics, and nothing really happened in terms of space exploration. In 1945, World War II ends and the American/Russian allies begin sucking up Nazi scientists and psychological architects of propaganda via paperclip and other similar unacknowledged programs. The entirety of World War II is, of course, the topic of an entirely different discussion. And anyone who wants to claim that I'm just skirting past all this World War II stuff and using the term Nazi flippantly, that's right, I'm skirting past that because that doesn't belong in this discussion. And I'm not going to open that can of worms here, not in this video. So in 1946, the term space age is coined. Shows like Lost in Space, along with film franchises and TV shows like Star Trek, are all centered around space travel and infinite space theory, are cranked out prior to the first spacewalks and prior to NASA claiming to go to the moon and everything. So people were pre-programmed to believe in things like space travel long before anyone even claimed to do so. And of course, they were calling it on TV the space age, just because NACA and the Russians had this alleged space race going on in the news and the press. So yeah, 1946, the term space age is coined, and shows like Lost in Space and film franchises, all centered around space travel and infinite space theory, are cranked out. Finally, in 1957, after over a decade of this fear porn and space propaganda, in 1957, Russia fires off Sputnik over the powder keg that was America, and ultimately, NASA's budget increases exponentially ever since. So, if anyone who didn't realize that NASA was a scam before, maybe they see it now, but satellites are only possible if the Earth is a globe. Since the Earth is not a globe, satellites are definitely necessarily a hoax, and furthermore, they're irrelevant. Like, even if the Earth was a ball, there was no reason to try to launch satellites because high altitude weather balloon arrays. And let's not forget that today, our connectivity across the world, we're connected by undersea cables all over the damn place. I'll put up a slide here. So you got things like satellite phones that are communicating directly with satellites. Yeah, those are high altitude weather balloon arrays. They've been using it since the 40s, long before satellites were necessary for even things like GPS, but modern day GPS uses towers, not satellites. And the satellite dishes attached to your house are communicating with high altitude weather balloons that are some 100,000 feet in altitude, 20 miles up or so. They claim that the geostationary satellites are like 20,000 miles up. And I'm sorry, but if you believe that little generic dish attached to the side of your house is communicating back and forth 20,000 miles to a satellite, you're tripping, you're hallucinating. Ain't it funny though that once the truther community started publicly scrutinizing NASA and debunking globe Earth theory, refuting things like the theory of gravity, which has never yielded a shred of physical evidence to prove it, LIGO quickly thereafter starts faking evidence of gravity waves by making grandiose, sensationalized claims in the form of since debunked and defunct press releases where LIGO makes statements like, "What you're seeing here is actually a real computer simulation," and then whole cloth invent evidence for gravity waves from the background noise, costing us all millions and millions of dollars to build, maintain, and run these tests at LIGO.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have detected gravitational waves. We did it. I am so pleased to be able to tell you that. So these gravitational waves were produced by two colliding black holes that came together, merged to form a single black hole about 1.3 billion years ago. They were detected by LIGO, the Laser Interferometer Gravitational Wave Observatory. LIGO is the most precise measuring device ever built. Let me start with what we saw. So on September 14th, 2015, the two LIGO observatories in Hanford, Washington, and Livingston, Louisiana, recorded a signal nearly at the same time, nearly simultaneously, and the signal had a very specific characteristic. The characteristic of, as time went forward, the frequency went up. And what was amazing about this signal is that it's exactly what you would expect, what Einstein's theory of general relativity would predict for two big massive objects like black holes in spiraling and merging together. Now, it took us months of careful checking, rechecking, analysis, looking at every piece of data to make sure that what we saw was not something that wasn't a gravitational wave, but in fact it was a gravitational wave. And we've convinced ourselves that's the case, and we're here to announce that today. So I'm going to show you two videos that are going to sort of tell you what we discovered. By the way, this is not a Hollywood production that I'm going to show you. It is actually a real computer simulation, solving Einstein's equations for these merging black holes. So this is really what it would look like if you were in a spaceship close up. It's mind-boggling. All right, now, let me talk about the gravitational waves. You didn't see any gravitational waves there. What you saw was actually black holes. Now let me look at this from the gravitational wave perspective. So you're going to see, again, a computer simulation. This is a real simulation using Einstein's equations. You see the two black holes. And the green that you see are the gravitational waves that are produced as the black holes orbit around one another. Their orbit decays and they merge together.
When LIGO was caught 2 times basically lying about their data, which they simply gleaned from background noise, this data allegedly coming from a long time ago and from a galaxy far, far away, you can't make this stuff up, they were claiming to have found this proof of gravity waves, which amounted to little blips on a chart gleaned by this multi-billion-dollar lie factory, again, LIGO. The people at LIGO patted themselves on the back for finally discovering proof of gravity waves. So very conveniently now that flat earthers were pointing out that there is no proof for gravity. But they did this self-fellatio, patting themselves on the back press release, only to be shot down by their own people as merely background noise. Frankly, nobody will ever find proof of gravity waves because, damn it, gravity doesn't exist. Gravity couldn't possibly exist. And there's really no theoretical need for gravity to exist once we realize that the world isn't a spinning ball.
What is gravity?
You have no idea. Okay, next question.
What is gravity?
You have no idea. Okay, next question.
What is gravity?
You have no idea. You have no idea. Okay, next question.
This is called gravity. That's what I do. I'm Neil deGrasse Tyson, bitch. That's what I do. I'm Neil deGrasse Tyson, bitch. That's what I do. I'm Neil deGrasse Tyson, bitch.
What is gravity?
You have no idea. Okay, next question.
This is called gravity.
We can describe gravity. We can say what it does to other things.
This is called gravity.
Gravity is a phantom of scientism, clad with dark matter and powered by dark energy, which is the latest attempt of the pretenders of theoretical physics to perform mathematical rituals designed to perpetually hunt for the evidence of something that doesn't actually exist. Just like the fire-breathing dragon in my garage who is invisible and breathes soot-free fumes, since you can't prove that I don't have such an invisible dragon in my garage, we could conceivably perpetually hunt for positive evidence for this dragon. Even if we never happen to find any such evidence, doesn't mean we can't dump a shit ton of money hunting for such evidence of this dragon that doesn't actually exist. Gravity is, of course, the very dragon in this analogy, and dark matter is the wind beneath its wings. LIGO is the dragon hunter of the analogy, perpetually dumping money at, trying to find invisible dragon shit, even if they never catch wind of so much as dragon flatulence. This same theory of gravity, which is supposedly keeping all the oceans, stuck in place, held steadfast to the face of the spinning world, and also ensuring that all the apples fall from trees, all thanks to the theory of gravity, because we all know the law of physics that mass attracts mass, right? All things are clearly attracted to the centers of other massive things, and all things are clearly attracted to the center of the earth by gravity. Except the problem is you can't show any demonstrable, scaled down evidence of this elusive non-force of gravity, like we can with any of the other natural forces, like, for example, electromagnetism. You can show scaled down demonstrations, repeatable demonstrations of electromagnetism and how they, you can get attracting and repelling forces of electromagnetism. But when it comes to this attracting force of gravity where mass is attracted to other mass, good luck finding experimental evidence for that. It only exists in theory. Not to mention when we observe things like helium balloons or hot air balloons and even rain clouds rising upwards, not falling, these anti-gravity devices are somehow not attracted to the Earth by this non-force of gravity, right? So rain clouds don't fall to the ground, hot air balloons don't fall to the ground, and high altitude helium balloons don't fall to the ground. Flames don't fall to the ground, right? So not everything does fall as they claim. So what does this mean? Are helium balloons like anti-gravity devices? Of course not. Let's not forget, if we take 1,000 tons of steel and dump that into the ocean in a ball or like a square hunk of 1,000 tons of steel, it'll just sink to the bottom in response to the Earth's so-called gravity, right? But if you mold the same 1,000 tons of steel into the shape of a ship, it will float on the surface of the water due to the principles involved with buoyancy. So the very same 1,000 tons of steel which fell and sunk to the bottom of the ocean isn't defying gravity by floating on the surface of the water. It's merely displacing enough water to maintain its buoyancy in blatant defiance of gravity. Just as the helium balloon, hot air balloon, or rain cloud isn't defying gravity, they're merely naturally synchronizing with their corresponding area of equilibrium. There, I said it. What goes up must come down isn't governed by gravity. Gravity is not the warping of space-time, which everyone is led to believe during our indoctrination into the globe Earth religion, the globism denomination of scientism, if you will. We're indoctrinated into this religion during a phase of our lives when we're prone to believing in all sorts of wild things like Santa Claus or the Tooth Fairy. The concept of what goes up must come down is certainly not something that is exclusive to a spinning ball Earth, as many a globetard seem to believe. What goes up must come down is, in fact, the very last thing that one would predict to occur upon a spinning ball, where you're somehow walking around on the outside gyroscopic edge of the ball. For the immutable laws of physics involving centrifugal force are equal measures strict and simple. If the Earth was indeed spinning faster than the speed of sound, for crying out loud, as they tell us, any object that wasn't securely fastened to the face of the Earth would be flung in a direction 90 degrees to the axis of rotation along a trajectory tangent to the gyroscopic edge of the Earth. What goes up must come down works perfectly fine upon the static plane Earth, wherein the world is quite simply at rest, just as it appears, and objects find their natural place of equilibrium based on their relative density. Higher density, heavier objects, liquids and gases, will tend to find their way down, while lower density, lighter objects, liquids and gases, will tend to find their way up. This is simply the natural order of things, and really all that's needed for this portion of nature to work in theory or to work in our cognitive understanding of it, all that's needed is some directional bias or tendency for higher density objects, liquids and gases to fall, and a tendency for less dense objects, liquids and gases to rise. While the exact cause and even the existence of this natural tendency or bias in terms of relative density equilibrium, this is hotly debated within the flat Earth community. It is my belief that we're definitely dealing with an electromagnetic phenomenon in some sense of the full electromagnetic spectrum, and possibly the natural static electric charge generated by the dielectric plane Earth itself as the underlying cause of this downward tendency, which is needed to support natural density arrangements that we find in reality. So if you shake up a bottle of vinaigrette and then leave it to rest on the table, the different liquids in the vinaigrette will naturally find their layer of equilibrium based on their density. One thing about nature, regardless of our ability to understand it or explain the working mechanisms of nature, one thing about it is that nature is balance personified. So I wouldn't say that things naturally find their balance. I would say that nature is balance, right? I'm confident that we will find that the rotational magnetic field of the Earth as well as varying layers of magnetic flux high in the sky as well as deep in the earth, are the direct cause of this natural distribution of matter based on relative density. The voice of God, or maybe the manifest will of the Creator, if you will. Take a look at these demonstrations done with like salt crystals or sand crystals laid upon a large audio output device, which show how different frequencies of sound played beneath this setup covered with said crystals causes immediate, obvious redistribution of the matter, just as the result of changing the frequency of the sound. Amazing geometric patterns are formed around this unseen, underlying matrix of sound waves, providing a sort of analogy as to how much higher frequency, magnitude, and volume waves generated from deep within the earth naturally and possibly generated far up in the heavens could provide a similar sort of unseen underlying framework needed to behave as a sort of blueprint for energy to take physical form and align to its natural area of equilibrium. We all know energy can't be created or destroyed. At best, it can only undergo various state changes and fulfill a variety of practical functions. Much like water can take the form of a liquid, a solid, or a gas, energy can vary its vibrational resonance frequency to behave in similarly varied functions. High-density matter is still pure energy, just resonating at a very low vibrational state, whereas ionized gases, or like plasma, is the same source energy pulling from the same pool, but oscillating at a much higher vibrational state with a higher resonance frequency. The blueprint which designates which path energy will take and which function it will fulfill is this underlying matrix, the spoken word of the Creator. The same blueprint also designates where lower density gases like hydrogen and helium will naturally find their area of equilibrium at very high altitudes, all based on a master divine plan, if you will, which is the blueprint of the Creator, and it is still very much a mystery to us. It's no wonder that many of our religious texts leave traces that the world was spoken into existence. And we also find legends and tales of some of these ancient megalithic sites like Angkor Wat being spoken into existence by their builders overnight. I don't think it's that far of a stretch to imagine a scenario where the world itself, the level of the waters, the tendency for down to be down, the winds aloft, the tides, and other natural variables and repeating great cycles found naturally upon the plane of reality are the physical expression of this divine underlying matrix of magnetic resonance fields which hold up the underpinnings of physical reality via vibrational frequencies that harmonize with the micro-resonance fields of matter, where matter is merely a lower vibrational state of energy. All of this generated by some indecipherable, undescribable mechanism, the very voice of the Creator. This physical plane exists at the pleasure of the Creator and by the will of the Creator. Should the Creator cease to breathe life into our realm on a constant basis, the very underpinnings of reality and matter would unravel, and all of creation would simply cease to exist. Luckily, the Creator is love and peace and truth and all other positive vibrational states, and so we are all very lucky and very blessed to have such a magnificent realm to call home. Although it does appear that certain wicked spiritual forces have gotten control over this realm for a very long time. Well, their reign is at an end. Hopefully we get to see it in our lifetimes, but who knows? We already know the Earth has a specific magnetic resonance frequency, just as all sentient life operates on a similar frequency. We are physically operating electromagnetic beings, attuned to this electromagnetic physical world during alpha states of wide awake brain activity, our problem solving primary state. But while we're sleeping, our physical bodies are shut down and even paralyzed, and we operate strictly within the spirit realm. In order to recharge our physical body's batteries, the miracle of sleep is a necessity more so than food, which means that temporarily escaping or checking out of this physical body or checking out of this physical realm is imperative for our health. This is circumstantial evidence of the imperishable and rejuvenating nature of the incorporeal spirit realm, as well as of the imperishable nature of our spirit, which is bound within the physical realm in the form of the prison of flesh. We are both physical beings and spiritual beings rolled up into one, which means all living creatures are very special and a necessary part of creation. Creation would be a lonely, unexplored place were no sentient beings around to experience it. Much like the riddle, if a tree falls in the woods but no one's around to hear it, does it still make a sound? This is to say, the phenomenon of sound requires a listener in order for the sound to actually exist. Or if a light shines in the dark without any eyes to see the light, it similarly stands to reason that the light didn't shine at all, as a beholder of the light is necessary to complete the phenomenon of light shining. Whatever the source of this creative dynamo which provides this underlying blueprint or framework for the matrix of reality, dictating which energy becomes solid matter and where that matter should physically align itself to according to its inherent area of equilibrium based on its density, you might call this literally the breath of God, or like the song of the Creator. Or you could call it something more generic and secular, like
the natural field designating patterns of matter.
The informational underlying framework which dictates physical reality is what we're dealing with here. It is a wonder that intelligence gave birth to inanimate matter. It would be a wonder of wonders if inanimate matter gave birth to intelligence. While it's obvious to me after years within this new paradigm that there is certainly an intelligent creator whose signature is literally everywhere, and whose magnificence is self-evident. The intelligence that created the stars and put them in their places is the same intelligence that created the world and every drop of water in it, and also created our spirits, somehow created our DNA code, also created this mysterious physical plane of reality, the dielectric plane, which is a dynamo of never-ending free energy creation, where we creatures of physical bodies also inhabit the spirit realm, or at least when we're fast asleep and dreaming, or maybe under certain states of meditation, but we are definitely chimeras of the physical realm and the spirit realm. What if this realm and human beings were not intended to be strictly stuck in the physical realm during our problem-solving waking states, while the spiritual realm of dreams is limited to when our rational minds are shut down and our bodies are completely paralyzed? Could you imagine a scenario where we humans have proper access to all of the frequencies of the spirit realm while we're wide awake? I wonder if you could do things like tell a mountain to move and it would, right? The observable heavens could also be linked to these vibrational frequencies, which act as the informational framework for the physical realm. Maybe the stars are somehow contributing information into the system as well, which could lend some credence to concepts like astrology. Perhaps the sun and moon are somehow functioning as positive and negative anode and cathode, perpetually generating, regulating, and distributing power to the entire system. This realm should be such an amazing place of unlimited potential, unlimited possibilities, But the powers which ought not be have hijacked our potential and have poisoned our minds, poisoned our bodies, poisoned our legacy, poisoned our inheritance with chemical, biological, and spiritual attacks. One thing is for certain, the ball earth theory gets another free pass from these immutable laws of nature in the form of the so-called Kármán line. We simply cannot live in a pressurized system that's housed within the alleged infinite vacuum of space, where the only hypothetical barrier, or the only force or non-force, compelling these disparate gas particles adjacent to the edge of space to stay put, is this whimsical theory of gravity.
Now, commence Operation Vacuum Suck. Suck!
They claim that it is the atmosphere's density gradient which allows for our pressurized Earth ball to hold its pressure whilst existing within the alleged vacuum of space, so they feel they don't have to worry about the high pressure of the troposphere being adjacent to the very high vacuum of space. No, they feel like they can skirt these immutable laws of physics involving fluid dynamics and entropy due to the incremental diminishment of pressure proportionally with altitude. So they say we have a density gradient, and therefore while we might have a pressurized area down here in the troposphere, it gets less and less dense and less pressurized with altitude. And so at the Kármán line, you have a super high vacuum adjacent to a not very pressurized area. Of course, nowhere in reality can you replicate a situation where you have a pressurized area of gases housed within a very high vacuum without some airtight, structurally sound container to separate the high pressure area from the low pressure area. High pressure will always move to low pressure unless there is some sort of structure and airtight barrier separating the two. Let's not forget the ball earth theory, and only the ball earth theory, gets all sorts of special treatment and theoretical exemptions from natural, immutable laws of physics which cannot be avoided ever. Just whenever it's convenient for the theory, fine, globe earth gets a pass because everyone's been tricked about the ball earth since we were toddlers, and so we just have to make it work in theory. The reason this is possible is due to the fact that everyone in the world has been tricked into believing the world is a spinning ball flying around the sky vacuum since they were just little kids. This means that everyone starts their so-called scientific inquiries into theoretical physics, also known as hypothetical surrealism, from the position that the world is a spinning ball, no matter what evidence we might find and present to the contrary. Any evidence that disagrees with the notion of a spinning ball Earth is either simply ignored or some convoluted exercise in mental gymnastics begins in order to ensure that any and all evidence ultimately conforms to the belief system, often using the secret art of mathemagic. You see, with mathemagic, physical proof and scientific repeatability are no longer necessary to prove a thing. Mathemagic entails the sacred art of reifying some cockamamie theory into something which checks out according to the experts who've already run the numbers, to save you the trouble of, thinking for yourself or weighing all matters for yourself. It doesn't matter how obviously wrong any given premise may be. If the practitioner wields the infinite power of mathemagic and believes in a ball very fervently, then common sense, logic, and obvious self-evident truths don't stand a damn chance in the face of a pontificate of scientism wielding the dark power of mathemagic. Let's look at another example of how the proponents for the spinning ball Earth just cherry-pick their laws of physics to apply to their concepts when it suits them, but just completely ignore the same concepts when it's inconvenient for their narrative. The Coriolis effect is a shining example of this. So the Coriolis effect is a real, fictitious force which actually affects objects in rotational motion. They call it a fictitious force because it's only apparent to an observer who is attached to some spinning frame of reference and subject to the rotational frame of reference of the primary object that's spinning. So, as a simple example, if you're sitting on a spinning merry-go-round, and if you toss a ball across the axis of rotation, the ball will appear to deviate from its straight line path trajectory opposite the direction of rotation. So the tossed ball will appear to take a curved path according to the observer still spinning around on the merry-go-round. But it's a fictitious force because, as observed by a stationary third party that is not spinning around on the merry-go-round, they will obviously see the ball take a straight line path, not a curved path at all. The reason the ball appears to travel upon a curved path, according to the observer fixed to the inertial frame of the spinning merry-go-round, is because the ball, once released from the rotational frame and thrust through static free space, is instantly stripped of its rotational frame of reference. And let's keep that in the back of our minds. Just remember, if a ball or any object is attached to a rotational frame of reference and then is tossed in some direction, released from that rotational frame of reference, it is instantly stripped of its rotational frame of reference. This is a definite law of physics, just as what goes up must come down is. Objects attached to a rotational frame of reference will only be subject to this inertial frame of reference spinning around the axis only for as long as that object is fastly secured to the primary spinning body, the merry-go-round in this example. So there is an inherent difference between objects at rest or even objects in a linear frame of reference compared to objects that are attached and beholden to a rotational frame of reference. So a rotational frame of reference is a horse of a different color, so to speak. So like when it comes to one of Newton's very first laws of motion, something along the lines of an object at rest will tend to remain at rest until enacted upon by some other force, or similarly you could say an object in motion will tend to maintain its linear momentum until enacted upon by some other force. But this doesn't exactly apply to bodies beholden to a rotational reference frame spinning around a fixed axis. So, unlike an object at rest, which will tend to maintain its momentum until some other force intervenes, in the case of a rotational body, like the merry-go-round, this doesn't really apply. Basically speaking, an object that is fixed to the rotating body will simply not continue spinning around the fixed axis if it is released from being held fast to that rotational body. If you take like a small weight and tie that to the end of a string and start spinning the weight around by holding the opposite end of the string, once you let go of the string, that weight will obviously not continue spinning around the axis as it did when you still held the string, and it will instead fly off into space at a 90-degree angle to the axis of rotation. If you're on a merry-go-round and like toss a beach ball across the axis or even out and away from the axis, the ball will appear to travel around a curved linear path opposite to the direction of rotation, according to an observer still fixed to that rotational reference frame. Again, another observer, like a third-party observer, not within that rotational inertial frame, will clearly see the same tossed ball as traveling a more or less straight line path or trajectory. Hence, the fictitious force of the Coriolis effect is only experienced by observers still beholden to and bound within the rotational reference frame. The religion of scientism preaches that cyclones, hurricanes, and typhoons rotate in opposite directions depending on their hemisphere due to this very Coriolis effect, this fictitional force. This is because they claim that, much like on the merry-go-round, The equator of the Earth is rotating fastest of all the latitudes at over 1,000 miles an hour, much faster than the speed of sound. As distance is gained either north or south of the equator, the rotational speed of the hypothetical spinning ball Earth decreases proportionally with latitude, distant from the equator. Their theory pre-requires that the air above the Earth's surface is apparently stationary, which means it is fixed to the inertial reference frame respective to the rotational velocity at each and every latitude. So air is somehow very smart according to the ball Earth theory. So the air above the equator is rotating at exactly 1,037.5 miles per hour on a still day, just like the ground is at that latitude. Then, say a few hundred miles north or south, they claim that the ground is spinning, we'll say 950 miles per hour. And similarly, the air above the ground is also claimed to be synchronized in intelligent lockstep with that velocity of 950 miles an hour at that latitude. Continuing north beyond to the tropics, the rotational velocity of the ball Earth is claimed to get slower and slower, and by some unknown, unmeasured, non-demonstrable, non-falsifiable theoretical mechanism, the air resting above these latitudes is spinning around, let's say, 800 miles an hour, and so on. It is this very gradient of rotational velocity which is claimed to be the cause of cyclones rotating in opposite directions, depending on whether they began north or south of the equator.
Why did you talk about my other football tweet?
What other
about
football
was it
tweet?
the Bengals? I forgot who it was, about a year ago.
Yeah.
There's in overtime, after there was the exchange of balls, so now it's sudden death overtime. They kick a field goal from 50 yards, of course, as it must be. And, 40 yards out plus the 10 plus the hiking distance. So it's like 52-yard field goal. And there it was. And if there's tense, right? Everybody's silent. And the ball comes up and it careens off the left upright and goes in for the win.
Wow.
And I said,
I remember this.
That's what I'm saying.
I remember this
That's
tweet.
what I'm saying. So I'm there and I said, wait, the angle of this, how long is it? So I checked the stadium on its configuration, what's longitude and latitude, and I said, I did a quick calculation, and I tweeted, the winning field goal in that game was aided by a 1/3 of an inch deflection to the right from Earth's rotation.
That is the nerdiest tweet I've ever heard in my life.
The underlying framework of this fictitious Coriolis force can be described as follows. Pertaining to rotational bodies as a fixed frame of reference, any secondary object attached to such a rotational body will only remain locked to this inertial reference frame so long as it's held fast to the primary rotating body, spinning around a fixed axis, with the necessary centripetal force to keep everything spinning in a curvilinear motion. If such a secondary body is released from this primary rotating body and compelled in any direction other than around that fixed axis of rotation, such a secondary body will simply not continue spinning around the central axis. Any rotational motion was only lent to this secondary body by the primary rotational body, and such rotational reference frame is instantly stripped from the secondary body the instant it is released from the influence of the primary body. So like tossed or released, right? No more rotational frame of reference. That's a law of physics. Now, when it comes to the ball Earth, they pretend that the world is spinning and pretend that the Coriolis effect applies to the Earth by pointing at these cyclones as their proof, which often spin in opposite directions depending on where it's located, north or south of the equator. They also claim that the Coriolis force applies to long-range sniper shots, and even some football field goals being kicked are claimed by some scientists to be affected by the Coriolis effect. But when it comes to actually testing whether or not the Earth is actually spinning, well, that's where this whole thing breaks down. You see, if the world was actually spinning at supersonic rates right now beneath each and every one of us, there would be certain telltale signatures in terms of these immutable physical laws that I keep harping about, which cannot be avoided by anything physical in nature. Not even the spinning ball Earth, as much as the globetards hate to admit it. So, for example, if we were to take an air rifle or a cannon and fire it perfectly straight up into the air, perfectly vertically, aligned to like a plumb line, how would we expect the vertically ascending projectile to behave upon a spinning ball Earth?
Well, we've come here to find out if you fire a bullet straight up into the air, will it come straight back down? That's beautiful. I'm just going to do a wind speed reading here. So the wind is 4 miles per hour out of south-southeast.
2, 1.
Shit.
Be quiet. Ah, exactly where we thought it'd be.
Well, we could do some basic experiments with scaled down, controlled parameters to establish some basic predictions here. So, based on the manner which merry-go-rounds and beach balls behave, if we apply the same physical laws or physical tests to the spinning ball Earth, we should expect to see a few things after we fire a projectile perfectly vertically. First, even if the projectile is hypothetically spinning along with the face of the Earth at supersonic speeds to the east prior to being fired, then after the trigger is pulled, we should expect the projectile to begin apparently traveling in a retrograde motion or opposite to the direction of the spin, so like to the west, due to our point of observation remaining fixed to the rotational reference frame with the Earth, whilst the projectile should be instantly stripped of the rotational velocity only lent to it by the hypothetically rotating Earth. Since the face of the Earth would continue racing towards the east and vertically descending along the curve of the Earth around the fixed central axis, but the projectile should be instantly stripped of its rotational subservience to this inertial frame as it was before being fired, a similar fictitional force should be exhibited from such a projectile, meaning it should apparently head west, and its perfectly vertical angle relative to the point when it was fired would become more and more skewed proportionally with its hang time, as the face of the Earth and we attached little observers would experience traveling along the curve of the Earth, thus changing relative alignment of vertical compared to the point where the trigger was pulled. So, like on its way up, the projectile should begin apparently traveling along a curved path up and to the west as we race down and towards the east, along with the curve of the Earth. Of course, the projectile would actually be traveling along a straight line path vertically upwards. However, according to we observers still within the rotational reference frame, would see the projectile apparently traveling along a curved path up into the west. Then, on its way down, the projectile should continue traveling west compared to us rotating observers, as well as misaligning to our relative definition of vertical as we continue traveling eastward and downward along the hypothetical curve of the spinning Earth. Our definition of vertical will have thus changed during the hang time of the projectile. Depending on the hang time of the object, according to some very basic immutable laws of nature which cannot be avoided, we should expect to see such projectiles return to the ground at some angle other than vertical, many miles to the west if we're dealing with very long hang times or very high altitude projectiles. So we should expect it to land way to the west and come in at an angle that's definitely not perfectly vertical or perpendicular to the ground, right? That's what we should expect, if the Earth was spinning, of course. Now, what actually happens in reality is that on very still days, the projectile is actually traveling perfectly vertically on its way up and perfectly vertically on its way down, with no apparent retrograde motion to glean at all. Oftentimes, it's been recorded when such tests were documented in the book Zetetic Astronomy that such projectiles fired from cannons or air rifles would actually land back into the barrel of the cannon that fired it. Similar tests have been done in more recent times showing similar results, and anyone can do such tests. These results, where projectiles fired perfectly vertically land very close to the location where they were fired, or even back into the barrel of the cannon that fired it, this data flies in the face of the spinning ball Earth theory. The very last thing we would ever expect to see is for such projectiles to land anywhere near the point where they were fired. Such results are blatant and irrefutable proof that the world is in fact at rest, not spinning whatsoever. And yet, these perfectly reasonable, repeatable, and logical data points, which only prove stationary Earth, not spinning globe Earth, are run through the filter of scientism, which again begins with the unassailable belief in a spinning ball Earth, so that any and all evidence which fails to conform to their axiom of a spinning ball Earth is somehow twisted around and then crammed to fit into a spherical shaped belief system. Logic and practical reasoning be damned. There is no arguing against an entire society full of people who are so very wrong about such a basic thing as the shape and motion of the world, who have all been convinced of a completely illogical and unbelievable fairy tale since they were toddlers by the cult of scientism. While this may be hard to wrap one's brain around, such tests as vertically aligned projectiles fired straight up into the air, which anyone can repeat, conclusively prove that the world is at rest. And while they claim that snipers must take the Coriolis effect into account before firing a long shot, or even some field goal kickers have their shots deflected thanks to the Coriolis force, when it comes to things like these vertically shot projectiles or even long-distance airline flights, these anecdotes about the Coriolis force designed to make the world appear to behave as a spinning object, but only in the anecdote, now these anecdotes fall apart, for the world is quite simply at rest, and all of this experimental and practical data proves it as such. For starters, if you read the snipers' varying handbooks for the military, the so-called Coriolis force that they're dealing with, hypothetically, is pertaining to the projectile as the spinning object and not the Earth. So when spinning projectile bullets, spinning rifled rounds, traveled through varying density and temperature atmosphere, then perhaps the Coriolis effect on the bullet spinning itself are taken into account, but not really. What I'm saying is made obvious when you realize that the sniper in the field is instructed to deviate their shot depending on their latitude, irrespective to the direction which they're firing. So whether they're firing north, west, east, or south, the amount of deviation due to this alleged Coriolis force is going to be the same either way, which conclusively shows that this has nothing to do with the spinning Earth, but rather the rifled round spinning as it exits the chamber of the rifle. If it were in fact the Earth spinning, then firing to the east would be way different than firing to the north, and firing to the west would be way different than firing to the south. If the Earth was spinning, snipers would have a hell of a time firing in any direction other than perhaps due east or due west. Aligned to the spin of the Earth. And it would be, a hell of a lot easier to hit a target that's way off to the west than it is to hit a target that's way off to the east. But no, firing a sniper rifle, long distance shots, regardless of the direction, you don't have to account for the spin of the Earth, because the Earth ain't spinning, dude. If you actually talk to snipers, who would be the ones who practically apply this alleged Earth spin to their shots, they'll tell you it's not accounted for whatsoever. That is, the spin of the Earth is not accounted for whatsoever. The same thing goes for artillery operators, bomber pilots, and even flight navigators, just to name a few of these applications of military technology which would definitely be affected by the so-called spin of the Earth if the Earth was indeed spinning, which it is not. There should be certain calculations made by operators firing a round of artillery or dropping bombs from a high-altitude bomber in order to correct for the spin of the Earth. One's latitude, along with the direction of fire and their direction of travel, would be extremely complex targeting mathematics, which should have been totally necessary for even coming close to your intended target. The simple truth is, while the temperature, winds aloft, bullet drop, and even the spin of the bullet, these sorts of things certainly do come into play when planning long-distance trajectory shots, but nothing whatever to adjust for the spin or the curvature of the Earth. This should be very telling. When we see instances of Neil deGrasse Tyson claiming that the Coriolis force has an effect on field goals, it makes a lot of sense that he would make these claims, because, well, frankly, we should see these obvious variables inflicted upon loosed projectiles very obviously in the world if we were spinning. If the world were actually spinning, it would be quite amazing the degree of acrobatics and apparent drift experienced by loosed projectiles. Field goals would certainly be a totally different experience on a spinning ball Earth, especially depending on which direction you were kicking the field goal. You know, are you aligned east to west or north to south? That would play a huge role in simply kicking a field goal upon spinning ball Earth. The simple truth is, the world is obviously at rest, as evidenced by the fact that not one single bit of time or energy need be wasted in figuring up the spin of the Earth into your long shots, Hail Marys, field goals, or airplane landings. The only place the Coriolis effect seems to have in anyone's life is if they're on the merry-go-round, tossing balls around, or maybe on the gravitron at the fair, tossing balls around. But certainly not when landing a plane upon the Earth, and certainly not when lining up a field goal. When Neil deGrasse Tyson makes the claim that the Coriolis effect does come into play during a field goal kick, but not when it comes to long-distance airline flights over thousands of miles, it is quite telling indeed. In truth, our world is obviously stationary and also lacks the convexity to suggest that it is anything but a plane. If the curvature needed for a spherical Earth actually existed, there would be ample, obvious, observable evidence, which wouldn't be super elusive as it seems to be now. Another hilarious example of this globe-worshipping nonsense is the levelness of the surface of large bodies of water all over the Earth. Over all measurable areas, the surface of the water is flat. Certainly, we find countless examples where the allegedly spherical Earth presents itself quite deceptively as a perfectly flat plane, especially when dealing with these large bodies of water, or even looking at distant objects dozens or even hundreds of miles away, like lighthouses or mountains. If the world were actually a sphere, then the surface of large bodies of water should describe an arc of this alleged sphere. Any linear distance across the surface of a body of water should be some arc of a sphere. Regardless of how irregular or unpredictable the surface of the land might be, the surface of the water is, however, a perfect indicator of whether or not our world actually has the physical curvature needed to end in a giant sphere, as we're told since elementary school, maybe even since as early as kindergarten and preschool. Quite simply, no curvature, no sphere. Simple as that. Regardless of how emotionally attached one may be to the spinning ball Santa globe, regardless of how smart or how educated one may be, the simplicity of this so-called debate boils down to no curve, no ball. Even if you believe Albert Einstein actually invented something other than a refrigerator part and a blouse, This utter lack of curvature is, of course, a deal breaker for the globe, all on its own. But even apart from that, also standing on its own as a total terminator of Copernicus, Termercapus, Copernicator, Copernisperminator, I don't know, but this lack of motion ascribed to the world by the logically repulsive, stupider than shit globe Earth theory is equally a Copernicus killer, a Copernisperminator. That is to say, if it were true and obvious that the world was actually at rest, then that fact alone would be sufficient to destroy the entire spinning ball Earth belief system upon which scientism is founded with all its many altars and subdivisions. For the heliocentric theory requires the Earth and all other elements of the hypothetical galaxy are in constant, mind-boggling motion along multiple curvilinear orbital trajectories. Regardless of how much you might trust NASA, even though they've been totally busted faking space using any and all movie tricks at their disposal, including the Neutral Buoyancy Lab underwater exact replica of the Lie SS, where you can see air bubbles in space, and the NASA astronauts have been known to use snorkels in space.
There will be several spacewalks. We attend to a major problem. There will be several spacewalks. With major problems they're using snorkels while they do it.
NASA has been lying their asses off, faking space, and blurring the lines between science and science fiction since Project Paperclip brought over Nazi intelligence infrastructure used as a psychological weapon against our very people, costing us trillions of dollars over the course of many decades in tax dollars. So where does all that money go? It would be super easy to follow the money, and while that doesn't necessarily prove anything, it would be interesting to see just who exactly is getting rich off the scam involving, faking space for over 50 years. Somebody's getting paid. The bottom line is, regardless of what you might believe, the world quite simply either has curvature or lacks curvature, and that will result in whether or not we live on a ball. Simply put, the world lacks the necessary curvature and lacks the hypersonic motion along multiple curved paths, as described by science, to result in the spinning ball Earth that we've all grown up believing in. The world is obviously at rest, and every single square mile of any ocean ever navigated is measured as flat and level. Just like water always finds its level, water and the horizon always are level. Of course, the natural undulation of the ocean surface notwithstanding. We all, as rational truthers on the same side of this argument, really need to try to come together. And if we're going to waste our time doing something, let's waste our time on actual experimentation towards better understanding our awesome and mysterious realm. More than just cooperation is going to be needed to figure this out. We need a certain element of meaningful camaraderie, maybe even a certain element of love when it comes to the absolutely unbelievable and of sublime importance truth that the flat Earth definitely is, as we all well know. And in light of that, we really need to try and set aside our beef, and if we happen to disagree on something, we can either try to work past it or just agree to disagree. But flat Earth is already such a treacherous beast in terms of the modern social construct and how the average Joe six-pack views we flat earthers, or more simply, how they view even the concept of flat Earth. We were conditioned into believing it was stupid since we were little kids, so average Joe six-pack doesn't think very highly of flat earthers, I can assure you, and they don't think very highly of the concept of flat Earth for sure. So what I'm saying is, I think this topic is too important to allow for beef and disagreements to get in the way of cooperation. And although it can be tough, man, can't we all just get along? Either way, I think we can cover way more ground and get much closer to the truth if we work together as a team. And it's important that we don't get too emotionally attached to any one concept over the other, even if we must humor certain concepts that we don't necessarily agree with. For argument's sake, that's what it's all about, right? In closing, I get so many endlessly lengthy comments on my videos from people who have clearly never watched the video that they're responding to, but have like 9 or 10 paragraphs, often poorly written, about how they're so right about everything and I'm so wrong about everything. They typically invent things that I've never said in order to debunk a straw man position which I've never held. I'll just tell you, it's not enough to read the title of a video, watch the first 10 seconds, and then go into lengthy diatribes about how perfect you are. That's not how a logical argument or debate is supposed to go. So you're definitely welcome to leave comments and post your thoughts here, but if you're going to argue against the points in this video, let's keep it confined to the points in this video. And if you don't like my shirt or, I don't know, my haircut or whatever, keep that shit to yourself if you don't mind. If you have legitimate disagreements with me, I'm happy to try to hash that out in the comments sections or even in future response videos. But I can't get to everything, so forgive me if I don't get to your comment. But also, there's a thing where YouTube filters out comments that I don't see why they filtered them out, but I don't go around deleting or filtering out anyone's comments. YouTube does that automatically. and it's a very difficult thing to reverse. So anyway, we'll wrap this one up, guys. Thanks so much for watching. I do appreciate you hanging with me. If you like the video, don't forget to give us a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe or resubscribe if there's a good chance that YouTube has automatically unsubscribed you from my channel. So just check that, and don't forget to click the bell notification. Also, I've got some merchandise that I'm going to be expanding on that you can find links below the YouTube player window for the Morguile Teespring store. I've got some hoodies and t-shirts, and I'm going to be adding some stuff to that. And then finally, if you want to help support our channel effort, we can sure use your help. There are channels set up with PayPal, Patreon, Venmo, and Cash App. The key word on all those is the Morguile. So like paypal.me/themorguile, venmo.com/themorguile, patreon.com/themorguile, and cash.app $themorguile. So with that, that wraps it up. Thanks, guys. God bless. One love. As always, spread the word, spread the world, and we'll see you in the next one, guys. One love. Bye.